I've come to the Meuse-Argonne American Cemetery in the village of Romagne. Many people think that the largest American war cemetery in Europe is the one overlooking Omaha Beach, but that just has just under 10,000 burials in it. This cemetery, where I am now, has over 14,000 burials from the First World War, making it the largest American war cemetery in Europe. This is where, in many respects, America's forgotten dead of the Great War are buried. During the Great War, on the battlefields of 1918, the Americans, just like any other combatant, buried their dead where they fell, next to captured trenches or bunkers, on the hills like Montfaucon, and in so many places between the kick-off line of the Meuse-Argonne Offensive and where the war ended close to the River Meuse on the 11th of November 1918. And this cemetery very much reflects that time period. There were scattered graves, small cemeteries across that landscape, and the decision was made to group them together into one large cemetery and then give the families the choice as to whether those lads remained buried on those battlefields or were repatriated at the cost of the American government back to the United States. And about 62% were repatriated. So when we look at this cemetery with 14,000 burials, this is still only a fraction of the total number of burials that were once here. Every division of the American Expeditionary Force is found amongst the crosses. They're marble crosses with Stars of David for Jewish soldiers, and all of the different battles in the tiny villages and the woods and the fields and the hills of the Meuse-Argonne are represented, including men who died on that last day of the First World War, the 11th of November 1918. It's a sobering cemetery to visit because of the scale of the burials that are here, those more than 14,000 graves. And it gives you an insight into that scale of America's losses and their contribution to that final phase of the First World War. If the war had gone on into 1919, it probably would have become an American war. They had the numbers to continue the fight against the Germans, which the British, and to a lesser degree the French, after 4 long, weary years of war, perhaps didn't have. And these doughboys that are buried here, that was their nickname. British soldiers were Tommies, Germans were often Fritz, the Americans were doughboys, or to the French they were the Sammies, after Uncle Sam. These men were an important part of the history, of the story of the Great War. Sadly, and I hate to say this, perhaps not remembered, perhaps forgotten almost in the country of their birth. And this cemetery reflects America's Great War history, not just with the American Expeditionary Force, because there are men buried in here who died serving as volunteers in the French Foreign Legion. Many Americans crossed to France, to Paris, to join the Legion on the outbreak of the war. And others crossed the border up to Canada to join the Canadian Expeditionary Force and serve with them on the Western Front. But in 1917, America entered the conflict, and the AEF, the American Expeditionary Force, was formed, and they were the units that fought those great battles here in the autumn of 1918. When I visit the Meuse-Argonne Cemetery, there are so many stories of the men and women buried here. There are nurses from the AEF amongst the casualties commemorated in this cemetery. But there are Americans who joined the French Foreign Legion, who flew in the Lafayette Squadron, volunteers for the French Air Force, and then of course the many men who served in different units of the AEF, the American Expeditionary Force. Medal of Honor winners like Freddie Stowers, a black soldier who served with one of the American units recruited from African American soldiers that served with such distinction in the battles of 1918, and just ordinary Joes, ordinary doughboys who came from the other side of the Atlantic to serve here, to fight for France and freedom in what they hoped was the war to end all wars. And just a generation later, German soldiers flooded through this area in 1940, and GIs, American soldiers, liberated this ground in 1944. A place of American sacrifice in two great conflicts. Aside from the huge number of burials in this Meuse-Argonne cemetery, nearly 1,000 American servicemen are commemorated on this memorial to the missing, where their names are listed in alphabetical order on the panels. American soldiers went missing just like the combatants of other nations for all kinds of reasons. There wasn't the mud of Passchendaele here, but there were operations in which tanks took direct hit and the crew were killed. We can imagine the sad, terrible result of that. There was shelling which obliterated positions and along with them men. And in some of the final battles as they crossed rivers, particularly the Meuse on the last day of the war, men were killed by machine gun fire and blown off footbridges and disappeared into the waters of the Blue Meuse. There's all kinds of reasons why a soldier does not have a known grave, but here their names are listed on the panels of this memorial, nearly 1,000 of them from this American battlefield alone. As you look at the staggering number of names on this memorial, you see military decorations noted against some names, but on others, as you work your way across the panels and see the dates of death, you occasionally see a little bronze stud. And that stud indicates that that missing soldier has now been found. In this case, Private Lonnie Blair of the 3rd Machine Gun Regiment, the 1st Division, killed on the 4th of October 1918. His remains since the war have been found, and he's now in a marked grave, either here or repatriated back to America. And here is the place to reflect on the cost of this war for America, on the important role of the men of the American Expeditionary Force, and to ponder how they're sadly forgotten. And that needs to be readdressed, really. Their role was pivotal in those final battles, and their achievements and their sacrifice deserve to be remembered.